Half a day and good morning. Welcome to our virtual session this morning. My name is Catherine Castro from the Guam Chamber of Commerce. Before we begin today's session, there are just a few housekeeping guidelines for our attendees. All participants are on mute during today's presentation. If you have a question at any time, please feel free to utilize the question feature on the panel located at the right corner of your screen. The Chamber team will pass the messages to our panelists during the Q&A portion of the program. Let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce our chairwoman of the board, Christine Belletto, who will provide brief opening remarks. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you, Catherine. Buenas and Hafa-Day members and guests. On behalf of the Guam Chamber of Commerce and our partner organizations, the Guam Women's Chamber and the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association, we would like to welcome you all to the COVID Perception on Guam webinar. Although the virus and our situation is constantly evolving, the results of the survey provide insight to our community's view on things that are important to the business community, such as how residents feel about indoor dining, shopping, and entertainment activities. It further gives us a glimpse of the financial impact the pandemic has had on households. These are important considerations for us as we continue to plan and modify our business activities to meet our customers' needs. I would like to acknowledge the sponsors of the survey, ASC Trust, Bank of Guam, and GTA, for funding the project and sharing it with us. It is our collective hope that you will find the information useful. Without further delay, I would like to recognize Mr. David John, President of ASC Trust and Chairman of the Guam Economic Development Authority Board, to introduce our presenters. Sizosmasi, and thank you again for joining us. David?
Sorry, I'm not even having trouble getting my muted. So I was talking for a couple of minutes there. I apologize. I'm having technical difficulty this morning. I am the reason we're getting off to a late start. I can't get on video-wise. I'm having a bad hair day. Those of you who know me will get that joke. Sorry for the delay here. But just a little background on what we're up to. Several months ago, myself and members of the Bank of Guam and GTA executive team started talking about what the general perception was with what's going on with the COVID virus in our community. This like politics, everybody seems to have their own personal views and surrounded by the people that kind of have the same views that they do. So there could be kind of an echo chamber of what's going on and what people's feelings are with things. But we thought from initially, as just a business standpoint, we need to make sure that we really understand what the community is feeling. We think we know what they're feeling, but that can always be dangerous thinking. So we talked about how we could get a better understanding of what the average person is going through. And the bank has been working with Anthology research out of Hawaii for many years on different programs over the years. So Ken and Maria introduced Anthology to GTA and ASC. And we made the decision initially to get on board with trying to figure out from a business perspective of how, get the background on this. As we went into it more, we thought this would be more important there's times to compete and there's times to act within a community. We thought this was a time to act within the community. So when we worked on this report, it was to get information for the full community. This is not politically one way or the other. We know who Ken's mother is. This isn't a political thing. This is something we thought was good across the board to help share information on what's going on. Some of it will be what you expect. Some of it will be not what you expect. Please stick through to the end because I think it all ties up at the end. With us this morning is David Pettinger. He's the president of Anthology, and Barbara Ankersmit, senior advisor. I'm going to let David and Barbara do the talking from here, but I just wanted to thank everybody for making time with us this morning and understanding what the report is about and how it came about. So at this point, I'll send it back over to David for David's presentation.
Thank you so much, David, and half a day. Good morning, everyone. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today to share the findings of this community survey with you. We do hope that this is an important resource for all of the businesses and residents of the island as we look to move forward and getting out of this pandemic, and of course the severe economic impacts that have been wrought. So I'm going to start us off with just a quick introduction of the survey, and then I'll turn it over to Barbara to talk about the methodology. As David mentioned, this was really a community effort, an effort from Bank of Guam, ASC Trust, and GTA to better understand the financial impacts of COVID on Guam residents, to understand the well-being and emotional impacts of the virus, and also to understand how people might be approaching their daily lives once this virus is past us. So I'll turn it over to Barbara to talk a little bit about how the survey was conducted, and then we'll jump right into some of the things that we found.
So it's always important to understand how the survey was done. It's also important to know that every survey starts becoming a little obsolete at the moment the last interview is done. So I want you to notice that this survey was conducted in September, from September 16th to the 23rd is when the interviews were conducted. So that's a little over a month ago. So there might be some changes now, some differences that can be looked at if there were a future survey. But for this survey, let's talk about it. It was an island-wide online and telephone survey. In this day and age, that some people are more receptive to filling out a questionnaire online, and others are more receptive to being telephoned and spoken to by a live operator. So we use a combination as best practice now shows that that's the best way to get a real random sample of residents. So these were all Guam residents. It was conducted September 16th to 23rd. And headquarters office in Guam for over 20 years and have on island staff as well. We conducted a total of 507 surveys using a random sampling approach. The margin of error is 4.44. What that really means is if we were to do this survey over 100 times, we're pretty sure that the results, 95% sure that 95 out of 100 times, the results would be more than 4.5% one way or the other when you look at any overall findings. So to help ensure that a balanced representative sample were included, we contacted people through 3 modes: telephone, both landline and mobile, and the telephone interviews were all done with live operators. And then we also contacted people through SMS text and email, inviting them to take in combination of random digit dialing software, because it does reach listed, unlisted, and mobile phone numbers. And then also we have a pre-recruited panel of Guam residents that we have been building up over the years. And we also used a little bit of publicly available voter contact records. When we look at the sample overall, it pretty much mirrors the overall profile of full-time Guam residents. And we're quite confident that it's a very good sample. I'm going to go back over to David now. He's going to start the findings.
Thank you, Barbara. And I should just mention that, we do a lot of surveys on different topics, both in Guam and Hawaii and elsewhere. And listening into the surveys that were done over the phone in particular, it was very encouraging to see the strong response that we got to this survey. People were very interested in talking to our interviewers, sharing their opinion, and really engaging with the questions that we asked. So I think that's an indication of how important this topic is to Guam residents. Let's start talking about with the perception of COVID-19 in the community. Having done research on this topic for the last 6 months in different places, we do see that the perceived threat or the perception of COVID really does translate to attitudes and behaviors. So we want to understand what Guam residents think about COVID-19. You'll see as you go through these questions, you'll see on the screen the question at the very bottom as it was asked in the survey. So if you are curious about exactly the language that was used, you can see that question language there. We asked residents whether they think COVID-19 poses a real danger or threat to themselves or others in their household. It was interesting to see that 4 out of 5 residents do see COVID-19 as a threat, but 1 out of 5, 20%, do not think COVID-19 poses a threat to themselves or others in their household. And as we do our analysis, and we call it segmentation, looking at various pockets of the community and different types of people who responded to the survey, it was very interesting to us to see that younger residents actually tended to be more worried about COVID-19 than older adults. For instance, 91% of those between 18 and 35 years old felt that COVID-19 posed a direct threat to themselves or someone in their household. We compare that with just 54% of seniors 65 and older. And we're going to talk a little bit later about why that might be. But it does have to do with the economic impacts and the job impacts of COVID-19 in particular. We also see throughout the study that there are disproportionate impacts by a number of other factors, including gender, with females being more likely to be impacted by COVID-19 than males, and that those in multi-generational housing and those with children in their homes also seeing a bigger impact of COVID-19 than others. We asked those 406 respondents, those residents who are concerned about COVID-19, who say that it is a threat, what they're worried about. And you can see here the four categories that came up to the top. This was by no means all of the options given, but it's interesting to see that these are all related to health concerns. So overall, of the people that we interviewed, all of them, the majority of folks really felt that health concerns were top of mind. But as you can see, young people in Guam are more likely to fear the loss of employment, fearing a decrease in income, or being unable to pay their bills as a result of the pandemic. Whereas 81% overall worry about getting the disease, the younger folks are more worried about the economic impacts. And those who live with a child in their home are more likely to be concerned about passing the disease on to others than those who don't have a child in their homes. And really more than half of the sample worrying about getting the disease, passing it on to others, or having it worsen health conditions that already exist. Those 20% of Guam residents who are not concerned about COVID-19 as a threat, 59% of them feel that because they follow the health department guidelines and the prevention guidelines that they're not at risk of getting COVID-19. About 2 out of 5, 40% of those people feel that they just don't go out very much, and so they're not at risk of contracting COVID. About a third of Guam residents feel that they're healthy and unlikely to get sick, and so therefore they're not concerned about COVID. And one interesting thing here is to see that of those who are not concerned about COVID, 1 out of 7, or 16%, just do not believe or trust reports of the severity of the virus. So there's skepticism when it comes to the effect of the virus on the community. Again, looking at that segmentation, we like to look at various demographic information, including household size and things like that. So as we look at that, we see that those who view COVID-19 as a threat are more likely to live in slightly larger households with 3 or more people. They're more likely to have children in the household under 18 years old. And they're more likely to be living in multi-generational households, those with at least 2 generations, if not 3 generations, living under one roof. There are also more likely to be renters as opposed to homeowners. Those who do not view COVID-19 as a threat to themselves or others tend to be older on average. They're more likely to be Caucasian if we look at ethnicity, and they're more likely to be male. There's been a lot of conversation, I know, in Guam, as there has been here in Hawaii, about home learning and education in the midst of a pandemic. So we wanted to understand how concerned parents are about sending their kids back to school. It's surprising to us that 84% of parents are worried that they will put themselves or their household at greater risk by sending their child back to school for in-classroom learning. So there's a very strong fear that sending their kids back to school will result in COVID-19 being brought back into their homes. 63% of parents are worried that they won't have the right skills, the tutoring, the supervision, the time and effort that's needed to support home learning for their children. And more than half, 56%, are worried that they're not going to have the right equipment, whether that's internet access, computers, tablets, or other things to support home learning for their children. And perhaps unsurprisingly, those concerns about having the proper access are more of an issue among the less educated and less affluent segments of the sample. And that's another trend that we see throughout these results, that those who have less means, those who can least afford it, tend to be even greater impacted by COVID-19. I'm going to turn it over to Barbara to talk about reaction to some of the efforts taken to prevent the spread of COVID-19.
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. You can give me the next slide, David. Okay, so we asked people overall, which of the following describes how they're adhering to the mandates and official proclamations from the government. So what you can see here is that the vast majority, 89%, when you put it together, think they're following all or most of the guidelines. Only 2% say they're picking and choosing which guidelines people get what to see what is happening now. Okay. David, next one. Oh, just a little pause, I think. Okay. So again, preventing the spread, we asked them to answer yes or no to each of these. My computer is giving me some trouble and putting a block up on here. So 34% of the people, of the respondents, said that they had personally gotten tested for COVID-19. 52% of the people we interviewed said that there was somebody in their household who was tested for COVID-19. 4% said somebody in their household tested positive. 26%, or 1 out of 4, said that they knew of a positive test at their workplace or the child's school. And again, 1 out of 4 knows somebody who's been hospitalized with COVID-19. One of the things that we learned in Hawaii is you become more concerned about the virus when you actually know people who've tested positive or have been hospitalized. And that's interesting. And that does tend to encourage people to follow the mandates a little better. Okay. And very interesting when you look at segmentation and who's affected, is you can see that more affluent and more educated segments of the sample are more likely to be tested. Even though it can be more of a worry and have more of an impact among less educated people, it's the more educated, more affluent who are likely to be tested. As you can see, 27% of those with household incomes under $50,000 a year have been tested, whereas 42% of those with household incomes over $100,000 have been tested. 40% of college graduates versus 30% of those without a degree. And the likelihood of a household member being exposed to COVID-19, either through a working adult or a child at school, grows in likelihood as the respondent becomes more affluent. You can see the differences down there. Only 22% with an under 50,000 household income, and 39% with a household income of over 100%.
And I would just add that 26% having a positive test at their workplace or children's school, or knowing of a positive test in those areas, is concerning, because of course that means that there is potential for exposure in those places. And this was again mid-September, so that number may even be higher today.
Yes. So, how do you feel about the actions that the Guam government's taking? 30%, 34%, we gave them the choice of these 4 choices that are here on the left side of your screen. 34% think we're taking appropriate action to combat the disease. And that's, by the way, 55% of the seniors, 65 and over, compared to only 21% of those 18 to 34, and 31% of those who live in multi-generational households, and 41% of those who live in single-generation households. Those people feel the government taking appropriate action to combat the disease. 28% feel the government's doing enough, but didn't respond quickly enough. So that's over 50% that feel that either we're taking appropriate action or that we're doing enough now, but we weren't quick enough. 25%, 1 out of 4, feels the government's not doing enough to combat the disease. And then at the opposite end, 9% think your government is overreacting. doing too much and keep becoming somewhat alarmist. Okay. Again, do people support the government restrictions? Do they support the government mandates? And you can look at the pie chart that's here on the right and see the overall 67%. That's, you know, 2/3 of the people say yes, they strongly support. It's about a 90% agreement with what the government's doing. 5% strongly oppose the government restrictions, and 5% strongly oppose. So you have 90% versus 10%. Females in particular strongly support the government's mandates and restrictions. That's 71% as compared to the other group. And then the males only at 62%. I think David mentioned in the very beginning that females are more likely to follow mandates and to be really concerned than our males. Okay, David, take it.
So next up, we look at the economic impacts of COVID-19. We talked earlier about how economic impacts may contribute to perception of threat and how perception of threat may actually affect attitude and behaviors that have to do with economic impacts. So these things are very closely related. It's pretty astounding to see that 54% of the households that we interviewed, so more than half of Guam households, reported a decline in income since the start of the pandemic. So more than half of Guam households have seen their income decline since March, April timeframe. And at the same time, 51%, about the same number, are seeing an increase in household expenses. So overall, they're being hit by both sides. They're seeing a decrease in income and they're seeing an increase in expenses that make it even harder to get by. And just as we talked about before, the decline in household income is greater among the younger, less educated, and less affluent segments of the sample. So again, those who can least afford a decline in household income are the ones who are primarily experiencing those impacts. And as it comes to the increase in expenses, the larger households, especially those with children, are seeing an increase in expenses in the last 6 months as a result of COVID-19, perhaps because they're home more often and they have higher utility bills, they have higher expenses of just being home than they did before. And as we look at the emotional impact of COVID-19 as it relates to economics, you can see that 75%, 3 out of 4 residents, say that they're experiencing some level of financial stress from COVID-19. 25%, or 1 out of 4 residents, report high levels of financial stress. That's the highest level that we gave as an option. 25% report high levels of financial stress related to COVID. 61% of households identify themselves as living paycheck to paycheck. So a strong majority of Guam residents feel that they're not able to really get ahead, but are rather just working to get by week to week and month to month. And 1 out of 5 households, 19%, say that they only have enough savings to last 1 month or less. And as we look at that breakdown of those who have savings to be able to get by, you can see there that about 1/3 of Guam households say that they have 6 months or more of savings in order to get by. About 1/4 have 3 months, but less than 6 months of savings. About 1 out of 5 have between 1 and 3 months of savings. But then that 19% there say that they have less than 1 month's worth of savings in order to get by without drawing from a retirement account or taking out a loan and borrowing money. So what does that mean for the everyday lives of Guam residents? Well, we gave them some examples to better understand what these economic impacts actually meant day to day. About 1/3 of Guam residents are having difficulty paying utilities. About the same number have actually utilized food drives or local charities to be able to feed themselves and their families. 30% say that they're having difficulty paying for car loans or repairs, just basic transportation needs. Housing crisis is potentially looming, with 1 out of 4 residents saying that they're having difficulty paying rent or mortgage as a result of COVID-19. 1 out of 5 residents saying that they've sought support from a local charity in the last 6 months, and about the same number saying that they had run out of food and didn't have enough money to pay for more. And about 1 out of 7 residents facing a health crisis for either themselves or someone in their family that they didn't know how they would pay for. So COVID clearly having an impact on income, increasing expenses, and having a real impact on Guam households on a day-to-day basis.
And you can see that this adds up to well more than 100%, to which it indicates that many people have having more than these things. In fact, you know, some of them are probably having 3 and 4, because there will be some that are not having any of these difficulties. So that should be noticed, that this can have a real impact on those households.
So what's contributing to that decline in household income? And just as Barbara pointed out for the last question, households could respond to more than one of these and have more than one of these challenges impact them as a result of COVID, but 38% say that they've had reduced hours or pay for someone in the household as a result of COVID-19. 35% say that they've worked less due to a drop in demand. 32% say that they've had someone furloughed or on temporary leave as a result of COVID. 1 out of 5 has said somebody in the household laid off. 17% report a decline in revenue for their business, if they own a business, if this is applicable to them. And 12%, about 1 in 8 households, have been unable to work because of childcare responsibilities. We talked before about having their children working, doing homeschooling, and that requirement to take care of children is impeding the ability for many to actually go to work. And that disproportionately affects those lowest income households that we've interviewed. And as you can see here, if you look at the unduplicated reach, and that is the number of households who responded to at least one of these items, 50% of households have been affected by at least one of these employment challenges. So half of Guam residents have seen an employment impact of some sort because of COVID-19. So how have they gotten by? Well, Guam residents, half of them have cut expenses. They've reduced their spending in a number of areas. 38% have spent down on their savings. They've drawn on their savings. And we saw before that many folks don't have a lot of savings to get by for a long period of time. 36% of residents have applied for pandemic unemployment assistance. And of those, we saw that about 60% had actually received their payment when we conducted the survey, but still 40% were waiting on receiving their PUA benefits. 1 out of 4 residents say they've applied for a new job. About 1 out of 5 have either sold something of value in order to get by, borrowed money from friends or family, added money to their credit cards and carried a higher balance, or taken advantage of special loan terms, or even applied for other government benefits in order to make up for that decline in household income. Some have even borrowed from retirement or applied for a loan or a payday loan or pawned something in order to get by. So what does this all mean for looking ahead? What is the outlook for Guam as we look ahead? I'll turn it over to Barbara to talk a little bit about this.
So what does the future hold? What do Guam residents think the future holds? Okay. Well, one of the first big decisions, of course, is when should Guam welcome visitors back? And so we asked that of people, what do they believe? They could only give us one of these 4 answers. 43% believe that we should allow visitors to come only if they tested negative for COVID-19. Another 40%, 2 out of 5, believe we should not allow any visitors until there's a vaccine. In visitors only from countries with low rates of COVID-19. And 3% believe we should allow all visitors to come now without any quarantine. That's at the one end of the spectrum versus the other. So residents are feeling pretty cautious about that at this point.
And I should say that as we look at segmentation by household income, one area that stood out is that those households who earn $100,000 or more in income were more likely to believe that we should open up the economy to visitors now without any quarantine. So they have a little bit more of an aggressive, optimistic approach for when tourism should restart.
Yes. So We asked people, when did they think the life will return to be close to normal in Guam? So most think it's going to take a year or more. As you can see, 59%, 60 said a year more. It's surprising to me that a full 7%, that's almost 1 out of 10, don't think things will ever be the same. You have the very bullish people at the 2% saying, oh, it's going to be fine in 1 month or less. Another 3% more than a month, but less than 4 months. And 8% 4 months, but less than 7 months. But that gives you only 13% who believe that in 6 months or 7 months or less, things are going to be back to normal. So the more prevailing is 1 out of 5 say 7 months, but less than a year, with 59% saying one year or more. Again, those more affluent people, if I recall correctly, are more bullish and think things will be okay.
Those who are also more bullish tend to be those who don't view COVID-19 as a big of a threat. So those who think that it's not a big deal are more likely to believe that we're going to recover sooner.
Okay. So this is one of the more interesting slides to me, and it's very interesting. How will things be different once the pandemic is over? So we gave them several choices. 60% say they're going to dine in a restaurant less. I mean, I believe that COVID and the restrictions on COVID have changed people's behavior and may have some effect into the future. And this is the first indication of that. 60% say they're going to dine in at a restaurant less. 29% say they're going to order pickup or takeout from restaurants more. 42% say they'll shop in person at retail stores less. 36% say they're going to shop online more. And so I think that the message to Guam merchants may be, if people are going to shop online more, they perhaps need to step up and offer products or services online, because otherwise they're going to be losing out if those are all U.S. mainland sales or international sales. Moving down to entertainment, 59% say they're going to go to movies or shows less. On the U.S. mainland, one of the largest movie theater chains is already permanently closed. And 38% say they're going to stream movies or music more. 30% looking at spending. 30% of the residents say they're going to reduce their overall household spending. And 49%, at least at this time, will save more for a rainy day. But we did see that 49 or more percent during the financial crisis of 2008. Everybody said, oh, this will never happen to me again. I'm definitely going to save more money. So we will see what happens. That may not be possible for all families and all households, but that's the intent at this time, as they feel they're going to be much more cautious with their spending.
So it's likely to see, we're likely to see some of those that people have adopted during the pandemic continue even once the pandemic is over and those restrictions are lifted. And we talked earlier about the importance of internet. We talked about home learning in particular, and we wanted to know how important high-speed internet is to Guam residents. And you can see here that the vast majority of Guam residents believe that high-speed internet access is very valuable. I think the pandemic has really made that clear, that the ability to do things just like this is only possible because of high-speed internet and the ability to connect through that platform. So that's not lost on Guam residents. So we wanted to allow a little bit of time for Q&A. Those are the key findings from the community study of Guam residents related to COVID-19. We're certainly happy to open it up to questions.
Thank you, David and Barbara. So we do have some questions on the chat feature, so if you wouldn't mind taking a look at that.
All right, I see a question here from Jackie. Aren't these suggestions of what folks will do post-pandemic impacted by the announced expectation of Pfizer vaccine? I'll remind us that this survey was conducted in mid-September. I think it was the 16th through the 23rd. So we have to put ourselves in the context of that timeline. I would say that We did position that question in particular about future activities and behaviors in the context of the restrictions being eased and the pandemic being over. So in that case, while those numbers may not exactly match what ends up happening because people report one thing and then end up doing another when the time comes, I do think that there's going to be a shift in the behavior of Guam residents as a result of this time being at home.
I'll add to what David just said. I heard on the news this morning that the vaccine that they're talking about may not be available till April, May-ish around, and even then there'll be a protocol, sort of an order in which people will reaches the general population. And again, this survey was done before there was any knowledge about a pending vaccine being available.
So next up, I see a question about widespread reduction in death rates being considered in government actions that are being proposed. I don't know if we can speak to this specifically related to the survey. Just about that the mortality rate seems to have dropped by an average of 18% for even high-risk groups like the elderly. The overall fatality rate in New York stood at 6.7% in April, but it had dropped to 1.9% in September. I would say that I think that the perceived threat of COVID-19 does change as cases go up and down and as mortality rates go up and down. So it is important to know that this was a snapshot in time, but yet a lot of the research that we're doing shows that people are actually getting a little bit more comfortable or sticking to their perceptions regardless of some of those external factors. I see a question here about the high-level demographics of respondents. I can let Barbara add to this, but I would just say that we have been doing surveys in Guam for over 20 years, and while there aren't publicly available weights by ethnicity or age, we can say that the demographic profile of the survey that we did here very much aligned by ethnicity, by gender, and by age with the studies that we've been doing over the years. Guam is certainly a younger population than a place like Hawaii, and you see some of the ethnic groups really match up with the studies that we've done in the past.
The fourth demographic that I think is very interesting that we pay attention to in Guam is the village where people live, and we're very careful to see that we have about the right proportion of people in the north and the south and so forth, and in the different villages to represent the folks. Slightly over 50% Chamorro, what we aim for, and this survey followed along pretty well. Just about half male, half female, so forth.
So there's a question here from Sam. Were there any questions about specific PPE efforts participants are doing to help reduce contracting COVID-19? We did ask this question about preventing the spread of COVID-19. This was in the context of adhering to official mandates and requests, including mask wearing, washing hands, and social distancing. So we didn't ask specifically about each of those items. We've done that in other surveys, for instance, for the Department of Health here in Hawaii, but these numbers are pretty consistent with what we've seen elsewhere, that about 2/3 of respondents believe that they're following all of the suggested guidelines. About another third are doing most of the things being asked of them, and very few will at least admit to picking and choosing or not paying attention to the guidelines. And I see a question
about is this study published and available for community access? This study does not belong to Anthology research. It belongs to the people who commissioned it. So we don't feel we can answer that. You'll have to go and ask them, but I think they are making it available to selected people.
There's another question about how many lost their jobs. So the information we have on this is asking about a job loss in the household. And we see that 20% mentioned that they'd been laid off. Although if you include those on temporary leave or furlough, 32% fall into that category. So whether it's 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 3 households, certainly a reduction in jobs across the island. And in addition, you see that there are reduced hours in pay or reduced work opportunities because of a drop in demand that are also contributing to that decline in household income. So a question from Sarah, did I hear correctly that those who test positive are more likely to be affluent? I believe the segmentation pointed out that those affluent folks were more likely to have been tested, not tested positive. So you can see here on the bottom left side that it was really about the overall testing, not necessarily testing positive. But those with higher household incomes were 15 points more likely to have been tested than those in the lowest income bracket. So the question is, appreciate the question or the response on Guam residents' willingness to allow more visitors to the island. Are we aware of a survey results from the other perspective, such as when visitors would be willing to visit Guam again? I think that's a very interesting question, and certainly something that I imagine the Guam Visitors Bureau would be looking at closely. I'm not aware of any publicly released or available information on that front.
Hi, David. This is Christine. I just wanted to mention that to the question about whether this presentation will be available to participants or the public, we just received approval from Bank of Guam that if they would like a copy, they can request it through either the Guam Chamber of Commerce, the Guam Women's Chamber, or GHRA, and we will be happy to share it with them.
Wonderful. And I know we did prepare a very concise, great summary of all of this information in PDF format. That's about 5 or 6 pages long that really provides all of this in a really clear and concise manner. A question from Sam about elder care and impact on families. We didn't specifically ask about elder care or caring for others in the household. We're always limited by time. We can only keep folks on the phone for so many minutes, and this survey averaged about 22 or 23 minutes per survey. And while we had really good response rate and people willing to share their opinions with us, we didn't have time to get into that specific question.
Because every survey, especially a survey that provides valuable information, always leaves you wanting to know more and to ask additional things.
So question from Marcos, was there any data on the level of concern for risk of spread by opening businesses? Again, that was not an area that we spent a lot of time on. We wanted to understand the big picture view of the perception of COVID, the economic impacts of COVID, and some of the things that may happen going forward. I would say, though, that the question that we had at the end that we went through about looking forward, this issue here, I think this is reflective of a concern among residents of going back and being back to business as usual. People looking to order takeout or pick up more, looking to shop online a little bit more, and doing those things less in person, I think is some indication of that question. I have a question here from Edward. Was there any input received from the survey participants that the amount of government unemployment assistance is sufficient enough to sustain those that have either lost their jobs or have reduced hours? We can look actually at our crosstabs to look at see whether those who had those economic impacts received government assistance, but we didn't take it a step further to ask them whether the assistance that they received from the government was sufficient to get by. Certainly something, if there's a follow-up survey, that might be valuable to better understand. A question from Carol.
We actually could have asked an hour's question.
I'm sorry, Barbara?
I said we actually could have spent an hour asking questions.
Yes. Is there any data showcasing COVID's impact on local businesses? This was a study of residents, of consumers. We didn't specifically ask about local businesses in particular. We've done that before where we've actually called local businesses, and we do know here in Hawaii doing some surveys along those lines that it is increasingly difficult to reach businesses because many of them are either working from home or have unfortunately ceased operation. We can say that there are, based on the financial impacts in the household, the point here about personal business decline in revenue. So those households who had a business, 17% mentioned that as one of the impacts when it came to a decline in household income, 17% saying it's because of a decline in personal business revenue. Question from Sam, are there any parallels to results of other studies, such as in Hawaii or elsewhere? I think Barbara could probably speak to this. I'll ask her to share a few similarities and some differences that we've seen between Hawaii and Guam in particular.
Yes. Yes, we have done quite a bit of COVID research here in Hawaii. One of the major differences is in Guam, young people are more concerned about COVID than in Hawaii. In Hawaii, it's the older people, we call them kapuna here, that are more concerned about COVID. But I don't know if it's because the media and our health department has talked about the threat and the danger to the elders. And the perception of the worry and danger is more economic and financial. Student loans coming due, can't go to school, have to have moved back in with their parents because the campuses on the mainland are closed and they had to come home. So, you know, those are the differences, but it's more health issues with older people and economic issues with younger people. And I think the economic issues quite high on Guam, so there's a little more focus on that from the young folks. So that's one of the real differences. We also have our doubters. I think that the 20% not believing or thinking things are overblown is pretty true. That's a real similarity from Hawaii and Guam. We certainly find that as COVID fatigue sets in, that we are seeing the same things. We're seeing actually a growth in people who are picking and choosing which mandates to follow. They're tired. They might say they're following most of the mandates, but they seem willing to break them for an auntie's funeral or a baby's first birthday. So we're like you are. We are very close with families and folks who want to be together. We hug, we kiss, you know, all of that. And so they're starting to break some of those things. That's why we had a second mandate, a closure, which nobody wants. That's a shutdown is the last thing people want. There was a lot of pushback against that. And I think people are trying to follow the mandates right now because they don't want another shutdown. On the other hand, people seem, we're quite worried about the holiday season because people do want to come together and they'll say, oh, we'll do it.
I think we might have lost you, Barbara.
I see a question about the size of the survey. Do you want to answer that one, David, or do you want me to?
Well, I'll start and you can fill in any gaps, but
Okay.
the size of the survey was a little over 500, which results in that margin of error of 4.5% at the 95% level of confidence. From our point of view, that's actually a pretty substantial sample size. The average survey here in Hawaii for a statewide survey is 400, and that gives you a 5% margin of error. And that's generally accepted as a good minimum sample size to make sure that there's statistical significance and the ability to compare one group to another. Given the mixed mode approach that we utilized and the random sampling approach, most importantly, we are confident that this is reflective of the Guam population within that margin of error.
In fact, I will add to that, even on the mainland U.S. in big cities, 400 is an accepted sample size. While it doesn't make sense, and when I was first taught this a long time ago, folks, but when I was first taught this, I balked and said, how can it be that if you have a population of 4,400,000 has a plus or minus 5% margin of error, and if you have a population of 20,000, you have the same 5%, but that's the statistical test, and that's just how it works. It's research, I suppose, but that's how it goes. Now, where it does start breaking down, and why you will sometimes see larger sample sizes, and sometimes here in Hawaii we will do more, maybe 700, because we want to be able to look at each neighbor island, because each neighbor island is very different than the main island of Oahu. So we will do it in that way. So sometimes on Guam, we might do a larger sample size if we really need to look at the south part of the island versus the north, or if there's some other factor that you really need to be able to delve into within a community or within a demographic. But otherwise, to look at the island as a whole and the overall demographics, a 500 is a very nice sample with that 4.5% level of margin of error.
Good questions.
Yeah, very good.
So there's a comment here about how long will my money last? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Question about, are we finding folks thinking of relocating to other islands off island, or to find relief through other job opportunities? You know, I think the fact that 25% of respondents, 25% of residents indicate that they're looking for or have been searching for a new job, I think is an indication that this slide in particular has an impact on employment behavior. You know, there are a number of people out there looking for work and trying to make sure that they can make ends meet and support their families. We didn't specifically ask about moving off island as one of those options. We were really focused more on the financial decisions on a day-to-day, but that is certainly a question that is worth considering in the long term. And we're seeing the same thing here in Hawaii.
Yep. I think there are many of the questions that you have asked in this question section that would be of great interest to follow up. I always say that good research begets more good research, because you're always wanting to know more and to, you know, add on to what you've already learned.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David and Barbara. On behalf of the Guam Chamber of Commerce and our partner organizations, Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association and the Guam Women's Chamber, we would like to thank David and Barbara of Anthology Research